All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. My name is Chris.
And my name is James.
And we're the Formula One Bros.
Just two twins with a love of F1 to share our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One.
And we are back after a wonderful weekend of motorsport and the Monaco Grand Prix. And just to kind of sum up the
weekend too.
Yeah, just to kind of sum up the weekend, Sunday was the Monaco Grand Prix. Then we watched after a 4-hour delay, the Indianapolis 500 won by Joseph Newgarden, and then just over half of the Coca-Cola 600.
It was like the Coca-Cola 375.3.
Yeah, which eventually, once it was called, I think it was Christopher Bell who won it.
Yeah,
but we're here to talk about Monaco, the Monaco Grand Prix, which was won for the first time in the Formula One Championship era, and in the first time in 93 years, the Monaco Grand Prix was won by a Monegasque, and that Monegasque is Charles Leclerc, who drove the Ferrari SF24 to victory. So before we get into all of that and what actually happened in the race, overall impressions on the race, go.
Well, the first lap was great. First lap was insanity. After that, it was super boring. As much as I loved watching Charles leading the race and winning the race, and Oscar Piastri getting second was really cool. Charles Leclerc's adopted son for the weekend, which that was a whole Twitter saga.
That was awesome.
Even Oscar Piastri's mom got in on it. It was hilarious. And she adopted Yuki Tsunoda. So anyway, hilarious. But yeah, it was nice to see those two. And then Carlos Sainz not seeing a single Red Bull on the podium was really nice. Watching a race when Ferrari and McLaren were the cars that were kind of doing battle, it reminded me a lot. I know you and I had kind of texted about this a little bit, but it kind of reminded us of our childhood, watching Ferrari and McLaren being the ones to battle, like in 2006, 2007, 2008, even in the 2010s, 2010, 2011, 2012, even though those were dominated by Red Bull, you still had Ferrari and McLaren kind of battling it out. It was really, really cool and kind of reminded me of their childhood. Other than that kind of aspect of it, the racing itself was really boring.
Yeah, it's the first time in Monaco Grand Prix history where the entire top 10 started finished as they started.
Yeah, and it was so I want to say we didn't see a single on-track overtake until Valtteri Bottas overtook, I think it was like Logan Sargent, and it was after the halfway point of the race.
Yeah, it took a while.
First time we saw an on-track overtake.
Yeah, it took a while to see an on-track overtake. So I definitely agree. The race was tragically boring. And I think it was because that first lap incident, essentially the thing with Monaco Grand Prix is that it's won in the pit stops. That's the 100%. Way that Daniel Ricciardo lost in 2016. That's the way Charles Leclerc lost in 2022. It's won in the pits. And that's just kind of the way that it goes. And I think that having that first lap incident, allowing the teams to kind of take a cheap pit stop, slap on a new set of tires, and honestly, Pirelli not designing a tire that would degrade, that could last the whole race, I think contributed to that. But that Pirelli discussion is for a whole other podcast. We can do an entire podcast on Pirelli and their partnership with Formula One. Maybe that's an idea. But I think a lot of those factors just created pretty much just a null and void race at the front. It was, the top four put on a fresh set of tires and went the remaining distance of the race on hard tires. Nothing changed about it. So that was kind of that. But I texted you in the middle of this because there was a lot of this cat and mouse with, were they going to pit? Weren't they going to pit? It all depended on the gap to George Russell, because whether or not they were going to come out ahead or behind. And, I think the drivers wanted to build a gap because they wanted to pit again, but the teams didn't want them building that gap, so they didn't have to pit again. And if they did pit again, it was like Ferrari was playing chess of keeping George Russell within a pit stop distance. So if McLaren's needed to pit, they'd be behind George Russell. They were just kind of like maneuvering each other, trying to get them to pit. And I texted you this in the middle of the race as that, kind of cat and mouse game was developing at the front. I love races like that, like the same way that I love pitching duels in baseball. Like if you have two aces on the mound, and this is what happened the last Braves game that I went to last summer when we were facing the Twins. It was two aces on the mound. Spencer Strider was one of them. And it was, there was no offense until the 8th inning. But watching those two pitchers pitch, watching Spencer Strider throw a ball 100 miles an hour was spectacular. And so in those games, you're not going to see a lot of offenses. And so for the casual fan, it's going to be like, well, this sucks. I want to see Ronald Acuna Jr. hit a 3-run home run, which he did. He did that night. But it didn't come until the 8th inning.
Yeah.
You want to see tack on runs. You want to see the small ball. You want to see the offense do big things. But I love it because I love baseball and I'm a super baseball nerd. And so watching Spencer Strider throw the ball the way that he was, I was enamored by it. And that cat and mouse game of are they going to pit? Aren't they going to pit? That chess game that was happening at 180 miles an hour was really, really intense for me. It was very slow burn intensity throughout the entire race. And so for me, I actually really liked it. I think that means I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I think it was definitely not an all-time classic and definitely not a race for, maybe a more casual fan who wants to see the overtakes. My advice is if you want to see that, you got to watch the Indy 500, but there were over 600 overtakes in the Indianapolis 500. It was like 628, something like that. Anyway.
Once you texted me that, I got a new perspective of the race. I was like, yeah, you're so right. It reminded me a lot of like watching Tyler Matzig's game 6 against who was it in the World
Dodgers.
Series, the Dodgers.
That
NLCS.
that 7th inning jam he pitched himself out of 3 strikeouts in a row.
Yeah.
One of which being Mookie Betts. And that, like, watching
Mookie
something
Betts
like that is crazy. But like, you're not going to see a ton of offense in a game like that. So,
once you texted me that, I got a new perspective of it, and kind of like, because you were right, there was a lot of like Charles saying like, oh, we need to back up Lando so that way he can't get a gap to George, so that way he can take a pit stop and get new tires. Because if he does that, he's going to undercut you, and then you're going to be on really old hard tires while he's on brand new softs. So it was really, really cool strategy playing. And one small little thing that I've appreciated, and not just from the Monaco Grand Prix, but Charles Leclerc's new race engineer is so much better than Zabi. Oh my God. Like, he actually gives good information and like actually talks to Charles instead of just saying checking.
Yeah, he kind of
checking.
seems like he just has a much more commanding presence in that role. And of course, it's not a new hire. He was the performance engineer.
Yeah,
he
was just moved over
Ferrari for like 10 years. He's been with Ferrari for like 10 years.
Yeah.
So definitely not a stranger to that role. Definitely not a stranger to Ferrari. But it was nice to see Charles's race engineer have a little bit of command of that position, and like not asking Charles what he wants to do, but telling him, hey, this is the way that we need to do things in order to win this race.
Yeah.
Like when Charles came over the radio and was like, hey, do you want to know the margins? And he was like, no, we are not interested in that. We know what the margins are. You do not need to tell me, because that information is going to get to McLaren and they're going to use it against us. It was essentially the messaging behind that. It was so refreshing to hear.
Yeah. It's nice to hear a race engineer have competence.
Yeah. And
like when you would hear James coming over the radio, or Bono coming over the radio to Lewis, or GP coming over the radio to Max. Like it's something like that. It's like, oh, like they actually like work well together and there's chemistry there. There was zero chemistry between, hello, Kitty. There was zero chemistry between Xavi and Charles.
Yeah. And I think, the other fun little, kink in the strategy game was that Carlos only had a set of softs left. So he was going to have to go long no matter what. And the reason why all this is important is because when your laps are 45, 50 laps old, or sorry, when your tires are 50 laps old, setting, a competitor putting on a new set of even mediums, they're going to be 2 or 3 seconds faster than you. And even at Monaco, that delta is overtakeable, and we've seen it happen with Sebastian Vettel and Charles Leclerc in the past, with amazing overtakes up the inside of Rascasse. It is possible. And if you have a time delta to the car in front of you that is 2 or 3 seconds, it's very possible. So I think that's kind of what they were protecting each other from. But so to me, I liked the strategy behind the race. It wasn't great for the overtaking, which you're never going to have at Monaco. You're never going to have a race that is dominated by overtakes. So now here's an interesting question regarding Monaco. Before we actually get into the race, I've seen everybody on social media asking, do we keep Monaco on the calendar or not? And that is coming from the fact that you had the top 10 staying the same throughout the race. Do you keep Monaco on the calendar? Do you not keep Monaco on the calendar? I want to hear your answer. Why or why not?
So when I'm going to relate this to a story. When I was in college, I was the trumpet section leader of the marching band at JMU. There are a lot of traditions that trumpet section has. Some are really awesome. Some are really not awesome. And when asked when asked by the staff, like, hey, what are the reasons behind some of these traditions? The only answer I could really give them was because that's the way we've always done it. And in my opinion, having something or doing something because that's just what you've always done is not necessarily the best way or the best reason to keep doing something. Monaco is one of those races. We race at Monaco because we've always raced at Monaco. The cars are too big. They are too wide. The streets are too narrow. I think Monaco was exciting when the cars were a lot smaller, like in the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, when the cars were almost half the size of what they are now. But granted, the car is going to look completely different in 2026. They're going to be a lot smaller. They're going to be a lot more nimble in 2026.
At least that's the hope.
That's the hope. Yes, that's the hope. Looking at the size comparison, they are going to be quite a bit smaller. They're going to be around the same size as what they were in like 2008. But anyway, I don't think right now it's conducive to Formula One racing. So I think, granted, it's a historic race. It's got tons of history at the race. It's the biggest spectacle on the grid every year, besides maybe the last race at Abu Dhabi. But I personally just don't think we need to keep racing there because it's just boring to watch. And I've made my opinions very known about Monaco on the podcast. I don't think we should keep racing there. It's a great, it's a great history. It has great history. The glit and the glamour, the yachts, the spectacle of it all is fun, but the racing itself is not great. And that's the same way I feel about Miami. It's the same way I feel about Vegas. The only street circuit that I actually really do like is Baku, because it's created some bangers in the past. But that's my opinion. I don't like it.
Yeah, I think I kind of like I'm definitely on the other side. I think we should keep it. And I think the problem is not Monaco. I think the problem is what Formula One has turned into. And I think there are changes to the track that are possible to make the racing more interesting. For example, what I would do is get rid of the Nouvelle chicane and put a DRS zone coming out of the tunnel. Because going to Tabac right now, it's not a big braking zone. But if you're going straight through the Nouvelle chicane and you're going to Tabac at 200 miles an hour, it does become a big braking zone. That creates another overtaking section. So I think there are things that you can do with the track that create more overtaking. I think it's and I think the cars just need to be smaller. It is entirely possible. It is 100% entirely possible for F1 cars to be smaller and to be lighter and to be as safe as they are now. I truly believe that. I truly believe. Now, this is also, I'm not an engineer. I do not know what goes into making these cars. Maybe it's not possible, but
we saw it in the early 2000s. They were small and also incredibly safe and aerodynamic.
Yeah. So I think it's entirely possible. I think you do that by getting rid of, I think you need to get rid of the hybrid power units, the V6 turbo hybrids. You need to get rid of those. Go back to V8s. I know that there's this whole like carbon neutral by 2050 or something. 2030. Great. You can use, and it is possible to use fully renewable and sustainable fuels, like synthetic fuels. That is 100% possible. Airlines are starting to implement that technology. Road cars are starting to implement that road production cars are starting to implement that technology. I know the market wants to go towards hybrid and electric. You already have an electric racing series. Bring the V8s back, get rid of the hybrid power units, because that's the bulk of the weight and the size of these cars, is because those engines are so freaking big and heavy. Get rid of that. Just use traditional V8s and use just fully sustainable and renewable fuel sources. It is 100% possible. Make the cars smaller. It's just, design a better car and design philosophy for the regulations.
Yeah. I know in 2026, they're getting rid of a specific engine. I think it's the MGUH.
They are getting rid of the MGUH.
So that, I know that will make the engine, the power unit, a lot smaller.
And that is the big reason that is facilitating the car shrinkage, is getting rid of the MGUH.
Yeah. But I overheard Stefano Domenicali was talking about how he wanted to bring back the V8s, which at first I was like, well, that's dumb. Then I started thinking about it. It's like, well, Formula One's already on the cutting edge of like fuel technology and creating, very, very sustainable fuels that are economically or environmentally very friendly. And they're already like the most, they're using the most economic or environmental friendly fuel in the world.
They are.
So like, yeah, why not bring back the V8s? Because I mean, towards the end, they had the curve system, which is essentially the same thing as the
MGUK.
The MGUK that they're using now, the way they use the energy to push that's literally what that was. Kinetic energy recovery system. Which
it's the same technology.
It's the exact same technology. So that's where the battery power was coming from. So they were already implementing that technology. So I kind of agree. Like, let's go back to the V8s. They're a lot smaller. They have really good sound.
Yeah, and it's easier to shrink wrap the especially the rear end of the car around a power unit that is as small as that. So I think, and again, my reason for keeping Monaco is the reason why I think it is entirely within the realm of Formula One and the FIA to create a system that, and to set up the formula so that it can be entertaining at tracks like Monaco, like Hungary, like
Miami, Vegas.
those high downforce, low speed, small little overtaking.
Well, and that's kind
tracks.
of why I mentioned at the beginning of when I was talking about it, when I mentioned like at least right now the cars are too big.
Yes.
And like in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, it was fine. So I think if the cars were able to get to become smaller, a lot more nimble, because we were able to see a lot of overtaking in those years. Not as much as, and still not as much as say when you go to like Bahrain or something or another racetrack, but still you were able to see a little bit more overtaking because those cars were smaller. It was possible. So I think I agree with that. Once the cars get smaller, I would say yes, let's keep Monaco.
Yeah. So that is enough about general Monaco shenanigans. Let's actually get into what happened during the race. First thing that we have to talk about is qualifying, because qualifying essentially set up the way that the race was going to go. And now more than ever, considering the top 10 finished as they started.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, there's a question that I always like to ponder after a race. How was the race won? And it was won on Saturday by Charles Leclerc, setting the fastest time in qualifying.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen him get pole here before and other things happen, but yeah, absolutely. He won that race on Saturday for sure. I went into this weekend kind of because this is just the trend of Red Bull and versus McLaren and Ferrari the past couple of years. Ferrari and McLaren do really well at the high downforce tracks in this modern era. Red Bull does better at the high speed circuits, where like say Bahrain, where they were able to pull like a 30-second gap. But so I went into this race knowing that this was going to be Ferrari and McLaren's race, and I'm glad I was proved right because Checo didn't even make it into Q3 or into Q2. He was knocked out in Q1, and then Max qualified 6th.
Yeah.
So I just think, I absolutely think this. I went in knowing this was going to be Ferrari and McLaren's weekend, and it was.
Yeah, and barring, or at least one of the Alpine drivers, which we'll get into Alpine incident later, but one of the Alpine drivers continued to mark the upward trend of Alpine slowly but steadily. Pierre Gasly locking down another point for Alpine. They continue to just chip away and chip away and chip away.
Did both of them make it into Q3, or did one of them?
Esteban Ocon did not finish
qualifying.
Sorry, I was talking about qualifying. Race.
Well, because we started this talking about qualifying.
No, Pierre Gasly was the highest qualifying Alpine, so qualified in 10th. He made it into Q3, as did Alex Albon, doing some great work. There was a moment in time where I was wondering if Alex Albon was going to be able to start on like the third row. He was doing really well. Pierre Gasly also had a great qualifying. So again, those positions were completely solidified. Actually, I don't think Alex Albon ended up qualifying in. No, he didn't. It looked like he was going to, but ended up in Q2, or out in Q2. But yeah, so that's pretty much how it is. You survive the first lap, the race is pretty much over at that point.
Yeah.
So speaking of first lap, lots happened. There was a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff happened.
The only things really outside Charles Leclerc winning, the only thing really to talk and a little bit of the strategy, really the bulk of what there is to talk about happened on lap 1. The first incident being Carlos Sainz and Oscar Piastri. Carlos Sainz got a really, really good launch, was trying to jump Oscar Piastri up the inside of Saint-Devat. But Oscar Piastri had a really good launch out of Saint-Devat, and they just touched, which gave Carlos Sainz a puncture. Fortunately, neither team suffered a lot of damage, so when the red flag ultimately came out, they were able to make necessary repairs and went back out on track.
Yeah, like nothing happened. And that was just a racing incident. That's just a symptom of the track being really small, the cars being very big and lumbersome.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was just a racing incident. They were trying to push really hard.
Yep.
Carlos was trying to get around Oscar. Oscar was trying to keep Carlos behind him. So that was just a racing incident.
Yeah, and Carlos just didn't have a lot of room on the outside. Oscar was there. It was funny. Carlos even commented. Carlos even commented in the post race press conference that they somehow just keep ending up finding each other on track. But he was like, "I promise, there's no rivalry, there's no beef. We just happen to like be near each other all the time on track when things like that happen."
Happen to bonk.
I don't think either of them were particularly upset about that incident. It was just a really and honestly, it was not a lot of contact. I was surprised.
I barely even noticed it.
I was surprised that Carlos ended up with a puncture, but I think it's just because he caught a floor edge, like the edge of Oscar's floor.
Yeah,
it wasn't just like a wheel on wheel. Yeah, I think it just because he made contact with the sharp edge of the floor, and that's what ended up doing it. Oscar didn't end up with any floor damage, or if he did, they were able to repair it under the red flag, and that's just kind of what it was. Speaking of the red flag, the incident that brought it out and neutralized the race was Sergio Perez, Kevin Magnussen, and very unfortunate standby with bystander. That's the word I'm looking for. With nowhere to go was Nico Hulkenberg. Ended up in a crash.
Yeah. So it's tough because I think initially I was like, well, that was dumb, Kevin. But at the same time, I remember an incident between Jenson Button and Lewis Hamilton in 2011 where they were racing each other. I think it was Canada. And someone, was it one of the commentators was like, he knew he was there. He's a world champion. He knew he was there. Now, Sergio Perez is not a world champion, but at the same time, he knew he was there. Checo knew he was there. I think he could have given Kevin a little bit more room, but also I think that was kind of Kevin's fault.
I actually am not entirely 100% confident that Sergio Perez knew that he was there, or to the extent of how alongside Kevin Magnussen was, which wasn't a lot. Because Crofty and Martin Brundle talked a lot about in the commentary how really the only thing that they can see is like the top of the tires. That's about it. And these regulations that came in 2022, visibility has been an issue. I think a lot of the things that they've done have rectified, and the way that they've kind of built their cars as the regulations have gone on have kind of rectified that a little bit, but I'm not 100% confident that Sergio Perez was there. And here's the thing, it's not like Kevin Magnussen was like at Sergio Perez's side pod or they were alongside each other. That gap was, and the other thing too, is that run up the hill towards the casino is not a straight line. But they take a straight line to get the fastest way to get up there. They're not kind of snaking up there. They're going on a straight line. That gap was always going to close. And Kevin Magnussen was not nearly alongside enough to stake a claim to that. And so I think it is Kevin Magnussen's fault. And because he should have backed out of that. He should have known racing at that track that gap was always going to close. I mean, he was not alongside. It was up to him to back out of that. I don't think there was a ton that Sergio Perez could have done differently. And I am shocked that the FIA did not penalize Kevin Magnussen.
Fair point.
And I think they did it because they chalked it up to a first lap racing incident, but there's a lot there have been several times this season and last season where first lap incidents have happened, and I'm like, yeah, that should have been penalized, and they're just letting it go because it's on the first lap. And it just kind of seems to me that the FIA is in this mode where they're just not officiating the first lap sometimes. Not all the time, but that to me was a very flagrant somebody was primarily at fault for that and should have been penalized either with, a grid drop for the following race, or, which would have resulted in a race ban. I think that just should have happened, in my opinion. But the most important thing that came out of that is that everybody walked away, because that was a heavy impact. And the pictures of Sergio Perez's car were shocking.
Yeah, it almost looked like Max's car in 2021 after he went off the track in England.
Yeah, it was
like it looked really bad. That was a hard, and if you look at his onboard, it was a hard hit, because he didn't hit a safer barrier, he just hit a wall.
Yeah, it was tough. And he hit the wall by the photographer boot, like the photographer area. And again, another fortunate thing is that no photographer was seriously injured in that. So by all accounts, everybody is okay, and that's very, very fortunate. But I think the person that I feel most bad for is Nico Hulkenberg, because he just caught up in it.
Yeah, he had no stake in the game, and it was just there and just got clipped.
Yep. And of course, that did bring out the red flag because of the amount of debris that had to be cleaned up and the repairs to the barrier that had to be done. So
and
that brought up,
there were 3 cars on the track that
that had to be cleaned away. So that brought out the red flag, which was good and necessary, but it effectively led to the neutralization of the race that allowed not only Carlos Sainz to repair his car and restart third, but it essentially gave everybody a free pit stop, and nobody really had to pit through the remainder of the race. So that was kind of what that was, and that brought that out. I think there's some debate that you can have about whether or not you should be allowed to repair cars or change tires at a red flag. But I think that is, again, I think the issue that created is much more Monaco specific, because they had a set of tires that could go the end of the race. I think that's just the way that is.
Yeah. And with Monaco, I mean, that a set of hard tires can last an entire race, because you're not really tearing up the tire all that much.
Right. And it's easy enough to manage the pace from the front because nobody's getting by.
Yeah.
It's just how it is. So that happened, that all happened. And then the last incident on the track, which actually we didn't really see until the cars had already returned to the pit road, was the contact made between the two Alpines, Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, at Portier.
Yeah, so that one was a really unfortunate. I think that was also kind of a racing incident. Who was it? Esteban Ocon was the one that got flipped up in the air.
Yep.
I definitely think that he didn't leave Pierre a lot of room, because he was trying to pass Pierre on the inside.
He was trying to enter a gap that was in the process of closing.
Yeah. So I think that was, if anyone's to blame there, it's Esteban.
Yeah.
And that was, I don't think it's worth a penalty, because he kind of did that to himself. But he's 100% at fault there.
Well, but see, I think it does warrant a penalty, because that was avoidable collision. He caused a collision there. It was 100% avoidable. He dived up the inside of Portier. That was 100% avoidable. And the reason why we have a penalty system is to discourage stuff like that from happening. So I think the penalty was warranted. I would have thought that the time penalty that he got would have warranted a 3-place grid penalty, because if you get a time penalty for an incident that ultimately leads to the retirement, you get a grid penalty for the following race. Usually it's 3. The FIA awarded him 5, a 5-place grid penalty. Now, the most, I think, important part of that is the fact is the internal Alpine side of this. And I think that's the most intriguing part of this, because before the race, Esteban Ocon was told specifically, You are to not fight Pierre. You are to not fight Pierre. He was told that explicitly. Fought Pierre the entire first lap, went for a dive bomb move and a place that you really shouldn't be overtaking into a gap that was always going to close.
Yeah. And the way
said that there will be consequences for that, because he not only did he blatantly disregard team orders, he was unable to finish the race because of it.
And I think, and I'm looking at the onboard of Pierre's onboard. And when that happened, he was trying to make a move on, I think it's Alex Albon in front of him. He was trying to dive up the inside of Alex Albon. So he was already trying to cut to the inside of the corner. Esteban like wriggled his way there. And then just like did not leave himself enough room at that on the exit. And Esteban didn't leave himself enough room and got caught. I don't know. I think because Monaco is Monaco, I think it's fair that he tried to take it up, like tried to pass him on the inside of that. I think that's fair. The dumb move that he made though was he tried, I guess he thought that he had completed the move. And if you look at Pierre's onboard, you see Esteban Ocon, passed him at the apex. He's already passed him at the apex, but then like starts to slide up the racetrack and clips his front tire.
Right. And that is the avoidable contact that they're talking about. It's not that he made the move up the inside. Well, it is a little bit that he made the move up the inside, because Pierre, like that gap was closing when he launched for it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a part of the track that you just don't go for that move. And he did dive bomb Pierre, and that was avoidable. And he probably shouldn't have done that. I think the reason why Bruno Fama and Alpine have reacted so severely to Esteban Ocon is because of the way that he was disobeying orders. Not necessarily that he went for the move, because if a move's there, you got to take it. I think he shouldn't have attempted the move in the first place. But again, I'm not a professional racing driver. I think the reason why Alpine is reacting so severely is because he was explicitly told not to do the things that he did, and the fact that it resulted in a DNF. Mm-hmm. And damage to the car that they now have to spend money to repair.
That I 100% agree with. But in this racing situation, I actually will disagree with you, because I think Ayrton Senna said it best: if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver. So I think Esteban just saw the gap and took it. Now, he did disobey direct orders from his team principal to not overtake, and that I think should get reprimanded for that, especially considering he knocked himself out of the race. But I don't think there should have been any on-track penalty for that. I think that was more of a racing incident. But the fact that he disobeyed his team principal and the team orders, I think he did, and it will get reprimanded for that on the team level. But I don't think on the FIA level, I don't think there should have been a penalty. I think that was a racing incident.
I think that contact was 100% avoided, and the penalty was warranted. Let us know what you think in the comments. What I will say on that, and this is definitely a sidebar tangent, I don't have necessarily a huge problem with Ayrton Senna saying what he said about going for the gap. My problem is he said that in reaction to intentionally taking out Alain Prost in Japan so he could win the championship. Like, that is my issue. And that even then is not my issue. My issue is that knowing that he intentionally took out Alain Prost at the first corner of Japan to win the championship, and that drivers continue to use that saying to justify when they do things that create avoidable contact.
Yeah,
that is my take on that. And granted, that is not something that Esteban Ocon said. That's something that you said. And I'm not trying to put words in Esteban Ocon's mouth, because Esteban Ocon even came on social media and said, yes, this was entirely my fault, and I accept the consequences from the FIA and my team. Like, he admitted that was something that he should have avoided, could have avoided, and knew he was supposed to avoid.
Yeah, I definitely think that the going for the pass was fine, but the way that he exited the corner, he just like dumb did not leave any room for himself or Pierre, and
Well,
he could have done that turn a lot better.
But see that is why he was penalized, like because the way that he did that was avoidable.
Yeah,
which is why the FIA, gave him a penalty. So again, I'm not putting words in Esteban Ocon. I'm not putting words in, to Bruno Fema or anything. I am skeptical when that Ayrton Senna quote is used. I only use it in I think it's only justified when it truly is a racing incident. And I don't think that this was a racing incident. I think that was 100% Esteban Ocon should have not gone for that move, and it was avoidable. But we could spend all day talking about that. Let us move on, because after that,
nothing
really happened. So the last thing that we want to talk about before we talk a little bit about now, one last thing in the Alpine, there is skepticism and rumors that Ocon will be replaced for Canada, which is next weekend. The only thing that's been said officially from the Alpine camp is that there will be severe consequences, and nobody knows what that means. So we will see what happens when we show up to Canada.
I wonder who would replace Esteban.
Well, right now their reserve driver is Jack Doohan. Mick Schumacher is an Alpine driver in the Endurance Championship. So there could be some implications, but there also could not, because he's technically the Mercedes reserve driver.
Yeah.
Or, you could put somebody, I think it'll probably be Jack Doohan, if anything, because he is their reserve driver.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that'll be that. It'll be interesting to see. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. I don't know. We'll see. And we will find out in 2 weeks' time when when Grand Prix racing shows up to Canada. So the last thing to talk about is obviously the most important part of the race, which was Charles Leclerc finally breaking the Monaco curse and winning on home soil. And obviously, it's a great day for Monaco. It's a great day for Charles. It's a great day for Ferrari. But I have to give props to Alex Jakes. So if you did not hear the F1 TV commentary, that commentary, I think Crofty's commentary was great, because he had the son of a hair cutter is a cut above the rest, which was great commentary. So Crofty did a good job, but Alex Jakes' commentary, I think, was the most poetic and beautiful commentary to sum up that race. He was talking about his father, how when in his father's last days, he told his father a white lie, and that he had signed the contract. He'd made it to Formula One. He hadn't yet, but it was his driving that helped him get there. Said some other things that were beautiful, but the quote that sticks with me is, the grandstands he saw built as a kid now rise for him. And that was the most, and then, for the first time in 93 years, this Fable race is won by one of its own. That was the most beautiful and poetic piece of commentary I think I've ever heard in Formula One. And there have been some iconic commentary moments, but that one to me sticks out as the perfect way to encapsulate what this race means to Charles and what Charles means to Monaco. And it was, I don't think that I've ever enjoyed watching a first home Grand Prix win more than I've enjoyed this. And that has nothing to do with me being a Ferrari fan. There have been some iconic home Grand Prix wins, like Ayrton Senna at Brazil, Lewis Hamilton winning the first one in 2000, his first British Grand Prix in 2008. I think there have been some incredible home Grand Prix wins, but this one, I don't think there is a more popular home Grand Prix win than this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even one, I think it was just on an Instagram story that someone took a screenshot of or screen recording of and posted it. But in Charles's like childhood apartment, like right at the top of turn one, in the big apartment building.
Yeah, it's that yellow building right
Mhm.
there.
All of his childhood friends were there, and it cut to a clip of them as he was winning the race, and like they were all crying.
Mhm.
So it was very, very emotional.
Right. And there was a
Huge.
there was a clip on the podium celebration of it cut very briefly to Charles's girlfriend Alexandra, and she was underneath the podium and she was crying.
Mhm.
I think that as much as it has to do with the fact that that's her boyfriend up there, she's also Monegasque, and so having a Monegasque win that race is I think just as important to her.
It means everything to everyone in that entire
Yeah,
country.
exactly. You know, if Prince Albert was on the podium spraying champagne, like that means so much to everybody there. There were pictures and videos of marshals on the side of the track crying during the closing laps.
Mhm.
Charles Leclerc even said in the last 2 laps he was crying and literally couldn't see because he was thinking about how much this meant to him, his dad, Jules, everybody. So, you know, I think what a really cool thing that we got to experience on Sunday. It was truly special.
It really is like kind of like a once in a lifetime or once in a generation
Yeah.
thing to experience with Formula One.
Yeah. Again, it's up there with Senna winning Brazil
Or
and Hamilton winning at Silverstone.
Or Sebastian Vettel winning in Germany in 2013.
Yeah. Like that, it's one of those things where it's like you can't really describe. And I think that even tops his win at Monza, you know,
Mhm.
and tops his win at Spa, winning for Antoine, who was a childhood friend of theirs. So yeah, it was just a really great weekend. But going back a little bit to the Formula One side of things, I think one thing that this says, given not only Charles's performance there, but Ferrari and McLaren's performance at Monaco, is I think the championship fight with Red Bull might be on.
I think it is. I think it
You
is.
know,
And we talked a little bit about it before we started recording.
there's what, like 30 or 40 points in it in both
25.
championships.
There's in the constructors championship, I think it's 25 points, 24 points. In the drivers championship, it's not much more. So yeah, I think it's game on. Now,
Yeah.
I will say I still think Red Bull has the edge right now, just because
Absolutely.
I know that I said it before when we were talking about qualifying. I knew it was going to be Ferrari McLaren's race. Red Bull historically does not do well at these high downforce tracks, but we're coming up on a string of track like Canada is one of those where it's a little bit higher of a downforce track, not to the extent of say Monaco, but it is a very tight, it's a very twisty track. And what comes after Canada? Is it Austria?
Spain, I believe.
Spain. So that's another kind of high downforce track. It's a little bit not as much, but yeah, I think yeah, I like to say it's championship on, because with how poor Red Bull did, and we talked about it earlier in the well, maybe we didn't. I can't remember if we mentioned it, if we were just talking about it before we recorded, or if we mentioned it with the recording with the Sergio Perez incident. If there are too many more incidents like that, I saw this tweet that said, if there's another Red Bull incident like that, not just for Sergio Perez, but if there's another Red Bull incident where a car is completely destroyed, like even one more like that, they're not going to be able to afford their end of the season upgrades. And so I think Red Bull has already hit the cap of what this car is capable of. And those upgrades at the end are just so minuscule compared to the upgrades that we're seeing Ferrari and McLaren bring. So I think Red Bull have hit the ceiling of what their car can be this season. And I think it's championship on. I think McLaren and Ferrari are going to make some even better upgrades. And it seems like both those teams, those upgrades are really sticking nicely.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's looking like it's going to be really exciting into the season.
I think the momentum will start to swing back towards Red Bull. I kind of, I'm hesitant to be like, this is how Red Bull's form is going to be for the rest of the season, because I just don't think it is. But
I agree.
I kind of, at least at the moment, I kind of view this race as I viewed Singapore last year, where it was the one weakness outside of pure dominance. I do think but the reason why I say championship on is because with Red Bull, you can have a weekend like they did in Singapore last weekend, and it's not really going to change anything. But now that Ferrari and McLaren are much closer, and I think there's a much better possibility of destabilizing things, it's going to be a lot more pressure on Red Bull. And I think now it's not going to just be when Red Bull have an off weekend like they did in Singapore. It's going to be, they need to be 100% on it. And any slightest little, they don't get the setup right or something happens, something goes wrong, Ferrari and McLaren are going to be there to pounce. And it's a performance deficit it's a gap in performance that they're now not able to mitigate. And they're not able to make up for, if they have a bad weekend. So I think it'll be interesting to see what the implications of Max Verstappen finishing 6th and Sergio Perez not finishing the Monaco Grand Prix will have at the end of the season. And if it comes down to it at the end of the season, and there's 12 points in it, I think, or
they're going to point to this weekend and be
Ferrari
like, that's
or
the
McLaren,
weekend.
Yeah, or Ferrari or McLaren are able to eclipse Red Bull later in the season, they might be pointing to a weekend like this as to, hey, this lost us the championship. Now there's a lot of season left and we have no idea what's going to happen, but it's the fact that they can't have a weekend like this, at least for now. At least now they cannot afford to have another weekend like this. So it'll be interesting to see. And Canada, technically is a street circuit. Technically, it doesn't. I don't think it drives like a street circuit. I think it drives much closer to a natural purpose-built road course. But
it reminds me a lot of Hungary.
Yeah, but it is a track where Ferrari and McLaren have both done well. And Red Bull maybe hasn't always done well. So it'll be really interesting to see. I think the keys here are that Ferrari is looking really consistent, especially Charles Leclerc has been very consistent. He hasn't finished outside the top 4 in the last 23 races he's done. And the thing for McLaren is that they've now had 3 consecutive podium finishing weekends in a row.
That hasn't happened since 2012.
Yeah, to me, that is huge for McLaren. And that's not only huge just from a result standpoint, that tells me that they are not just on the right track, they've turned a corner. And they have really put a dent in correcting the limitations of that car. I still am not 100% convinced that they've completely gotten rid of the limitations of that car, because I think it's a fundamental weight distribution problem that car has. And that comes down to the way that the chassis is built. But I do think that the things that they have done have severely limited that problem. And they've had 3 consistent weekends in a row at a wide variety of tracks.
Because
Miami is a little bit more low downforce, high speed. Imola is kind of somewhere in the middle. And then you have something like Monaco, which is literally the highest downforce track that you have. So they've done it across a wide range of tracks now, and it's been consistent. So I think that kind of seals the deal for me for McLaren. And if Ferrari go out and have a weekend like they did in Monaco in Canada, I think for me that'll seal it for Ferrari that those upgrades have moved them in the right direction. So
Yeah.
I think Canada is going to be hugely important because Red Bull need to find a way to bounce back. They have to have a dominating weekend. And then, you know, McLaren is going to want to continue on this upward trend, but Ferrari is going to need a really good weekend to kind of confirm that they are being consistent. Because Imola, they had the upgrades and it wasn't really their weekend. I think they got it wrong with the setup and it wasn't really their weekend. So I think they need Canada to be really successful, them to confirm a couple of things. But I don't think that there's a reason to think that they can't do it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. I 100% agree. So again, a lot of season left, and I'm really, really excited to see this championship battle unfold.
But for now, it's on, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right.
McLaren as a constructor, well, and both of the drivers, but they have a much bigger mountain to climb. So I think at least for now, it is championship on for Ferrari, definitely. And if McLaren can have another solid weekend in Canada, for them too.
Yeah, I still think Red Bull has the edge, but now one aspect of this is going to be now that you know, Ferrari is a lot closer, they're going to have to rely heavily on Sergio Perez to also make sure that he's picking up the points, because Charles and Carlos are extremely consistent,
and so is Oscar,
and so is Oscar. Oscar and Lando are both consistent too. So they're going to heavily have to rely on Sergio Perez to make sure that he's pulling his weight and not finishing 5th, 6th, 7th when Max is winning the race. Because even if Max wins the race, we're going to have a situation like in 2021 where Max won the championship, but they didn't win the Constructors' Championship.
Right.
And I'm sure that they're going to want both. And so I think that puts the pressure on more so Sergio Perez's head rather than Max. I mean, Max is Max. So
Max is Max, and he's always going to do everything in his power to make sure that he maximizes the result. Maximizes the result. Yeah, I love how we came up with that. Like we thought of that at the exact same time.
It's like we're twins or something.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think we'll get a much better picture once we start getting our way into the European season, because that's traditionally where Red Bull have really separated themselves from the competition, is during the European season.
Yes,
at tracks like Spain, Austria,
England,
Belgium, Great Britain, you know, those tracks are really where they start to separate themselves. But we've been chatting for a while now, so it is time to say goodbye, and we will see you next time. We have a weekend off, and then it is Canada. I know the Indy 500 happened this weekend, and it was incredibly entertaining, and I will definitely, this off weekend for Formula One, will be tuning into the Detroit Grand Prix for IndyCar. Very excited for that. Hopefully Pato can redeem himself there. But anyway, that is all for this edition of the Formula One Bros podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, all of our social medias, and on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. And be sure to let us know what you think on the state of the championship.